by that point I was kind of in my early 30s and I started doing the math. I'm like, at what they're making today, they will literally have to work until they're 85 and hope to not have an illness, and they still won't pay off their very modest home. And I was like, well, that's not a good idea. Anyway, so I got my creative juices going, and fast forward, not only is their house paid off, they've been traveling full circle. My parents are giving me a hard money loan from my latest project that I just told you about that I'm sure we're going to end up with, which in our wildest dreams, like that was just never going to be a reality.
Hi, I'm Wyatt.
And I'm Grace.
And you're listening to Our Dad and your host of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Moore. We're back with our Friday interviews with successful short-term rental investors. And today we get to talk to one of the OGs in the short-term rental space, Miss Beata Lawrence. So Beata, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited about this conversation. I do consider you an absolute OG. You've been in this game a long time. You got a extensive background, way more than most of the gurus and coaches that are out there. You and I met back at the end of 2019 when you were, when I was just starting Dynasty. I think we were talking before we hit record. You were probably member number 12, and now we've got almost 3,000 members in our mastermind group. And so it was.
I'm still waiting. Gold star, I never got one.
Right, you're getting it today on the podcast. So if I could pass that gold star on, you've been around the block a long time. We got a lot to cover. In fact, we were talking about what are we gonna cover on this, because you've been in the game for a long time. We're going to talk about a lot of different things throughout the years as you build that portfolio, change the portfolio, shifted around different markets, and why you did that. But you've also had a total loss in a hurricane that you had to deal with. You've got top properties in a lot of different markets. You're a realtor by background and trade that you pays a lot of the bills, but you work with a lot of investors in that space. You also understand property management. You own a property management company. So you got a lot of irons in the fire and a lot of experience in this game. So I'm excited about this conversation. But what I like to start with is the background. Tell everybody kind of where you're from. I kind of hinted to what pays some of the bills, and but what got you interested in real estate in general, because you've been doing this a long time, and really before short-term rentals were as popular as they are today, you got interested in short-term rentals. And so let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about that journey.
So I always try to keep this story short, because I actually, in my first adult life, I worked in corporate. So I'm a logistician by study and by trade. So I worked for a large corporation for about 11 years. And I like to joke that I'm now on my 16th year of maternity leave. So when baby number 2 came, and baby is about to turn 16 in a couple months, I literally just didn't go back to work. It was by choice. But we, at the time, we didn't realize it was going to be a permanent choice. We just thought it was going to be an extended maternity leave. But I have been working with my dad, who is now mostly retired, other than when I pull him out for my pet projects. He's 70 now, believe it or not. Yeah. I've been essentially flipping houses with him since I was a child, and I'm the oldest. And I kind of just got into it, and I did that until I left for college. And then I kind of, between college and my corporate life, I really wasn't involved in what he was doing. And then when I started my maternity leave, to be very frank, I was very busy, but also very bored. Yeah. And I was looking for something. I wanted something that called my own. And so I reached out to Dad and asked what he was doing. And they were still in Pennsylvania at the time, and kind of, just muddling through. My father is an incredible craftsman, not a great businessman. And self-proclaimed, he knows that. And so I kind of made a proposition to them, and I asked them to move down to Baltimore, which is where we were living at the time. We currently live in Cary, North Carolina, a suburb of Raleigh. And I said, Dad, come down. I will run a business for you. So I'll do all the back end of the business stuff. You do the work, and we'll do it together. And it was a little scary for them. For me, it was like, well, I don't have much to lose, but for them it was a little scary. But I consider that one of my greatest accomplishments, because my parents are immigrants. They were pregnant with me when they came to the country legally. I now say that it's a thing. So legally they came to this country. Right. And they were taught, like many immigrants from Eastern Europe at the time, that you have to have insurance and you have to work for someone else. And so my dad, as talented as he was, he had a factory job. Like his day job was a factory job. And then he built houses literally on nights and weekends. And it was a waste of talent and, just a waste of resources. And, by that point, I was kind of in my early 30s and I started doing the math. I'm like, at what they're making today, they will literally have to work until they're 85 and hope to not have an illness. And they still won't pay off their very modest home.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's not a good idea. Anyway, so I got my creative juices going, and fast forward, not only is their house paid off, they've been traveling full circle. My parents are giving me a hard money loan from my latest project that I just told you about that I'm sure we're going to end up with, which in our wildest dreams, like that was just never going to be a reality. And so it's really cool because I started just getting into house design, and, he would get hired to remodel a bathroom, and the client didn't know what they wanted. And Dad was like, well, just, he can install and create anything that you show him, but he's not very good at like coming up with what that design is. So inevitably he would just be like, well, what do you think? And I just got better and better at it. I don't have a formal background in it. So fast forward to 2014 or 15, we decided to move to North Carolina from Baltimore. And Dad and Mom stayed in Baltimore. I was still kind of remotely running their business. And my husband is still in tech sales, but back then he used to travel a lot. He doesn't travel so much anymore. And so he was gone, 45 out of 52 weeks, literally, like just gone. And it was the first time we were living in the suburbs. And there was a lot of pros about that. And that was the reason we moved. But I'm not so wired for that. And I got into a little bit of a tiff with one of our neighbor moms. And I got really upset. And I thought, if I'm going to be living in this crazy place, I want to at least be at the beach, because for the first time we're like 2.5 hours to the beach. And honest to God, it was like an octopus took over my brain, and I could not get this idea out of my head. And my husband is very fiscally conservative, like very fiscally conservative. And so I came to him after a business trip, and I was like, I think we should buy a beach house. And he laughed at me. Yeah. And then the next week I'm like, no, we really should buy a beach house. And this went on for about a month, and I wasn't letting it go. And finally, like in a very patronizing tone, if you can figure out how it can make money for us, sure, honey, go buy a beach house. I'm like, oh, okay.
I got the green light. Yeah.
90 days later, we closed on our first oceanfront. I can say this now because it was almost a decade ago now. We're still married. We came this close to getting a divorce over that decision.
Right.
Because he truly thought I was going to bankrupt us. And there was something about it. I don't know. I mean, I kind of consider it like a message from above in some way, because I wouldn't let the idea go. And I truly thought, like, I know I can make, not only is this going to be a lifestyle asset for us and a home that we can use and enjoy, I truly believed it was going to make us money. But I had no data and no background. And like, I didn't know what a pro forma was. I didn't know how to analyze a property. It was a lot of instinct. Like, and I do know houses. I know a lot about houses. Right. I have a business degree. So unbeknownst to me, I actually had a lot of the skills and background that I accumulated through all the different things I was doing. But at the time, I just wanted a beach house. So fast forward, here I am. I have my own property management firm. So clearly it's going well, but that's really how it started. I wanted a second home. I don't want to go as far as say we couldn't afford, but that was not aligned to kind of our wealth strategy and our retirement strategy to float the second home.
Right. But, and at that time, 2014, 15, short-term rentals were not, the shining star of real estate that they have been the last few years, right? Nobody even knew what they were, right? When if you said that, they wouldn't even really know.
No, and the term STR didn't even exist. No. It was a vacation home. And so we invested on Topsail Island in North Carolina. And basically what vacation homes were people's second homes that they chose to either rent out Memorial Day to Labor Day or some version of that. Back then, people weren't even renting 12 months a year.
Right.
Like it,
just
and
the summertime. It was just
and it was just starting where I was probably one of the few on the island to truly self-manage at the time.
Right.
Before, the norm was you just hired one of the local big box real estate agent property management firms on the island, and they managed the property for you.
Yeah, and at that time, Airbnb was much more focused in the urban areas and more like they really started off with like the couch surfers. They weren't really focused on full homes in vacation areas, destination type areas. It was like, hey, this is mostly in urban areas where people were trying to couch surf, basically is how it started. Vrbo really started off as the first one doing whole homes and thinking about like the vacation rentals. Right. And, at that time when you were starting to launch that, that was a tool or resource available, but there wasn't all the fancy property management solutions and the tools and everything else like back then. So you're navigating this, really in the Wild West and kind of on your own, right? You're just kind of figuring this out as you go with the ultimate goal of just saying, hey, listen, I had this ultimatum of I can get a beach home, but I have to figure out how to make it pay for itself. And you're taking it and running with it. So you've got your view of this world is much different than somebody that jumped in 2022 or 2021 and rode this wave for a while and now trying to figure out and navigate, right? This is way before that, way before COVID, and ultimately navigating that. How did it, talk to me a little bit about, because we're kind of getting back to, I always tell people right now, the market right now, outside of way more resources and tools available to us, the market itself is a lot more like it was in 2017, 18, 19, pre-COVID, where the people that knew what they were doing were making money, but not everybody was making money in the game, right? Mm-hmm.
I agree, except guest expectations are completely different.
Way different now, right? This is the time where you have to have you have to be professional. Back then, you could have I call it grandma's cabin and have it furnished as however it was with your family property, your family beach home, and people would come in and it was, hey, we want to rent your home. Totally different guest expectations, but it was outside of that, you still had to be able to say, okay, how am I going to run this business? How am I going to attract somebody? Because not everybody, the supply and demand was a lot more aligned how it is today, much different levels, but ratio wise, it was more similar to what we're seeing today.
What's interesting back then is, so I wanted to address 2 points. So Vrbo, yes. So I spent probably the first 5 or 6, maybe 7 years of my career in this industry, literally running my entire business on Vrbo alone.
Yeah.
I didn't have a PMS. I didn't have my funny, dirty little secret is I actually only added Airbnb to my portfolio 9 months ago.
Yeah. I know you were like a holdout for a long time.
I was like the last holdout.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, back then it was fascinating because, again, my little microcosm of Topsail Island, I was one of the very first ones, if not the first one, who offered short stays in the summer and peak season, and did not force people to do the Saturday to Saturday thing.
Right.
And the reason, like you touched on it in the beginning, is it's how we wanted to travel. So my husband, as I mentioned back then, traveled all the time for work, and he's actually not really a beach guy. So he would never take a full week's vacation to go to the beach,
right?
But he'd go a Thursday to a Monday or a Friday to a, Tuesday or whatever. So I actually, I created a strategy back then. To your point, there's no price labs, there's no pricing tools, there's no Facebook groups or gurus. But in my mind, I did the calculations that if I can rent the house for weekend, like call it Thursday to Monday, weekend nights, and get like 90% of what everybody else is getting for a full week. Because my thought process was, and it turned out to be true, that people would pay a premium for weekend nights if they weren't forced into that whole week. And I was like, I was a stay-at-home mom then. So I'm like, I'll go Monday through Wednesday and everybody else can go Thursday through Monday. And it's a win-win, except what failed was it worked so well that people kept filling in the Monday through Wednesdays too. Right. And I never got to go. But you would literally offer sheets, towels, toilet paper, salt and pepper, and you were the hero. Like it was literally like my reviews were like, this is a fully stocked property. So that's what makes it funny when you're going now where the guest expectations are so different. But in terms of the supply and demand, it's, I've been saying for the last year or two that I believe budget properties will do well because everyone's still looking for a budget and there's a budget traveler, and the higher end, high amenity, high expectations, as long as you're doing them well, executing well in a hospitable way, will continue to do well. But the trouble is, just like America, that middle ground, that's where people are suffering. Yeah. Because what I'm finding is, I'm just sitting in the industry, is that middle ground is so vast that what ends up happening is people will, people being guests, will choose one of the lower price points in that middle ground, but have the expectations of the higher price point, but didn't pay for it. Because we don't, in our industry, we don't actually have we have tiers, but we don't have guest standards for those tiers. As hosts, we kind of know what the tiers are and what we're trying to aim for. But what I'm finding is, guests know what to expect if they're going to a Hilton or if they're going to, I don't know. I don't stay at bougie hotels, so I don't even know the names of them. The Ritz-Carlton, right? Yeah. If you're staying at a Motel 6, you have certain expectations. If you're staying at the Hilton Garden Inn, you have certain expectations. If you're staying at the Ritz, you have certain expectations. Yep. The trouble is, when guests stay at Airbnbs, despite the fact that they're paying a variety of price points, they don't understand the tiers because none of the OTAs are dividing us up into these tiers. And that's where I feel like a lot of the people who are trying to aim for the middle are suffering financially and with reviews, because there's and it's not their fault. It's just the industry hasn't evolved enough to create this yet. But there's a misalignment between guest expectations and what the hosts are providing. Yep. And when you have that, it's just a recipe to fail and to be frustrated.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that you did a really good job of articulating that and explaining it, because I always say right now, it's that we only are focused on the top of these markets because it's the easiest.
That's what I do.
We're saying, hey, listen, we're only going to go out and focus on the top of the markets. There really should be ability to make money in every single tier. The problem with it is exactly what you were saying, is the guest expectation is not there. And so you run the risk, if you're going to be a budget property and you're able to do it profitably, there's people that are looking for a budget, but they also, even at that level, they're still expecting more than what you probably can deliver and be profitable at, right? The other problem with the budget side of it is, on the low side of it, is like Dan Kennedy always says, if you can't be the lowest price leader, if you're going to operate at the bottom of a market, you can't be the low price leader, there's no competitive advantage of being the second low price leader, right? And so unless you can actually be the leader at the bottom, and there's profitability in that. Walmart does it, right? There's business models that do that. There's hotel chains that do that, like the Motel 6s, and they understand how to do that. But the guest also expects that, and they understand what that expectation is. In our world, the guest doesn't quite expect that yet, right? The bar has been risen so high, especially at the top of the market, that everybody is saying, hey, listen, I expect this for this price. That doesn't work. And so rather than have that argument, go figure out how to operate at the top of the market, because you're not having, and then you get paid for it, right? And you're getting paid for it. You're being profitable. The middle of the market is just a dead zone, right? It's like it's like no man's land. Everybody is the exact same. Everybody is just kind of competing with the same product, the same offering. Everything looks the same, and you just blend into the crowd. The bottom, you can stand out. The top, you can stand out. The problem with the bottom is, especially in most markets right now, unless your basis is low enough on that property to operate at the bottom, which means you bought it a long time ago with really good rates when they were really low a long time ago. If you're currently buying properties at higher interest rates, higher acquisition costs, it's hard to operate at the bottom and be profitable anyways. So just ignore that part of the market.
That's my strategy.
Yeah, that's ours as well. And so it's really interesting. And I want to dive into as well. I know you guys had a devastating loss in Hurricane, was it Ian?
Florence.
Florence. Okay. Hurricane
2018.
Florence. Yeah. And it was, so did you just have the one property, the first one that you bought?
All three.
You had all three at that time. Okay. And
they all three got hit.
Walk us through that. And just mentally, because it happens in a lot of these beach areas, because I know we're not in hurricane season right now. It's the beginning of the year, but right now, as we're recording this, there's these devastating wildfires in California again, because they don't mitigate anything, which I can go down on that topic again, which is frustrating, but losses happen, right?
Yes.
And they can be devastating. We had the hurricane come through North Carolina and the western North Carolina mountains, where you're very familiar with and have properties there now. And it's scary, and it's there's nothing easy about it. And so talk to me about that, because then that probably leads into maybe why we started considering different areas to kind of divest out of one area, go into another area to check out other things that you can do. So talk to me a little bit about that and share some of your thoughts and some advice, because I know you've always got really good advice for people that have gone through that, or, may be going through that if they're in those types of areas.
Yeah, that's a lot. I'll lead in with, we started that I've been doing this for a long time, but interestingly enough, we are now on our third iteration of completely starting over with our portfolio, our personal portfolio.
Yeah.
And I'll just touch on that real briefly, but a lot of people assume that if you've been doing this a long time, then, we have 3% interest rates, and we bought in 2019 and 2016. But my current portfolio, we actually purchased 100% in 2023 and 2024, and we're still profitable. So it's possible. It's just so much harder. I mean, I will say that it'll take me looking at 200 properties to find one that's even worth spending another 10 minutes on. Right. Whereas back then, you just pick one and you could make it profitable.
Right.
So we, as I alluded to, we started on Topsail Island. The ocean was my best friend at the time, and I really wanted to be there. So property number one was half of a duplex, but they're completely separate homes. It just happened to be an attached duplex. So we bought property number one, and then property number two, we bought almost exactly 12 months later. So we ended up just buying the second half of that same duplex from those owners. Okay. Then my husband was sold. He's like, okay, clearly you know what you're doing, so let's buy another one. So keep this in mind. So going into Hurricane Florence in 2018, we owned a duplex. So at this year, we're maybe 2 years into this, 2.5 years in, so I feel confident enough that I know what I'm doing. I'm providing a good experience, but certainly not an expert, and don't know, there was nobody really to talk to at that point. So we found a property that was less than 2 blocks away. This is important for the hurricane. So we've got 2 right here and 1 right here. And so right before closing, my husband says to me, keep in mind, these are all unrebuildable lots. That's going to be my plug. I don't know what it's like in other states. In North Carolina, a very large portion of the coast, currently oceanfront, they're called non-conforming lots, which means they're unrebuildable, which means that if you sustain more than 50% damage through storm or fire, most people don't think about the fires. The fires take out more ocean fronts than the storms do. You are not allowed to rebuild that. And what that actually means is most people don't realize your insurance covers dwelling. And in most parts of the world, the country, that's fine because you own the land and you can rebuild on the land, except in very specific areas like the coast, where if the structure no longer stands, they won't let you rebuild on that same lot. Okay. So now current pricing in North Topsail Beach, for example, lots are worth $600,000 to $700,000 oceanfront before the dwelling. Your dwelling most likely only is worth $250,000 to $400,000. If a fire or storm takes out your dwelling, you get a $250,000 to $400,000 check, but you may have $1 million mortgage.
Right.
Those are the implications most people don't think through. And we knew that going in, but until you're actually faced with bankruptcy, like right there, you don't really think about it. And I could smile because it's been a lot of years, but there's a lot of PTSD involved. So my husband says to me right before closing, Beata, do you really think it's a good idea to own 3 ocean fronts less than 2 blocks apart? Oh, it's fine. What is the probability all 3 would be hit? Honest to God, we closed on the third one in June of 2018, and Florence took it out in September of 2018. And it's a very small, it's about 1,100 square feet. And then like a little tiny like a laundry room under the house. My dad and I worked, no joke, 20 hours a day for about 6 weeks. And we had completely rehabbed this tiny home. It was 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. I mean, we redid everything. We redid siding, windows, flooring, 2 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms, all of it in about 6 weeks, working nonstop. I had only rented this property for less than 4 weeks. And when I say the storm took it out the entire foundation. The city condemned it. And we were going to lose the house. And we were going to be that. So the house is featured on CNN for an entire week. So I knew that it was not a good, I knew it was standing, but I knew it was not good. So basically, I don't know if I ever told you the story, Shawn, but what we found out in the end after about a year of rehab is the flooring saved the house. So it was a long ranch, and it was so grace of God, I'll just say it that way. And there was 4 pilings, and there was 4 sets of 4 pilings. The storm surge took out the first 8 pilings. So the roof it was literally like a dollhouse. And we had like a 6-inch gap in the roof, and the house was literally hanging. So the street facing pilings, the house was sitting on, the entire, like half of the house literally had 0 foundation. It was just hanging, and it was not hanging by the roof because we could visibly see that it broke.
Right.
We could not figure out what was, at the time, I just basically said it was my sheer determination that kept this house, because the city gave me 30 days. They said in 30 days, if it turns into a dollhouse, we're demoing it, and you got nothing. And we had not only did we just mortgage it and just buy it, we just dumped almost $120,000 into reno costs that obviously we didn't recoup. And they said, but if in 30 days it's still standing, we'll let you put steel beams under it, and then we could counterlever it. And so we weren't allowed to move it. So we actually, the interesting part is we do have enough room. I don't own the house anymore. We did have enough room on the lot that we could have moved it. But with all the rules with the erosion and everything, it's like, it's either has to be where it's been to get grandfathered in, or it's gone. Like there's no in between.
Right.
So we hired house movers to put steel beams underneath. And literally it took 3 months of counterlevering. They would come every week and put more weight on the front end to very slowly jack up this house to level it up. And then I had to hire a pilings company to dig pilings. And then so we had to jack up the house a bit higher, get the pilings underneath, and then literally set the house back down on it. And then after it's been sitting for 6 months and growing moldy, we essentially had to tear it down to the framing and start all over again. Jeez. Because nothing was salvageable on the inside. But the blessing was we kept the house. But what we found as we started tearing everything out is there was 3/4 inch plywood going this way. And to this day, we don't know why. There was another layer of 3/4 inch plywood going this way. Then in the 80s, somebody put 3/4 inch hardwood 2/3 inch planks on top of that. And then 2 months before the hurricane, I put LVP on top of that.
Oh,
so literally the flooring, so it ended up sinking almost 2 full feet. But the flooring and the fact that it was interweaving is the only thing that saved that house.
Oh, wow. Crazy.
Yeah.
And allowed you to rebuild it, because like you said, it would have just been, you would have had, $1 million lot that nobody can build on, which is worth nothing.
It's worth 40, we call them party decks. You could put a party deck on it.
Right.
And it would be a $40,000 lot. Yeah. And we never did go down that road, but the implications are, you still owe money on that mortgage. Right. Because your insurance check only covers the dwelling. And in those particular cases, the land is usually worth twice what the dwelling is worth. So you'd have 0 income, 0 capability of making income. So then your options are either to declare bankruptcy, and then you're done. I mean, you can't buy a house for 7 or 8 years anyway. Right. So we were this close. We were this close.
You always talk to people a lot about beachfront properties, the risk reward with it, and really looking into some of those things that a lot of times you don't think about, especially on those first purchases, and or you're not familiar with those areas, which is why it's so critical to work with somebody if you are buying in those areas that, one, knows the area, but two, is going to be honest with you about the risk reward on it. It's one thing that I always like to within our group and the people that you've worked with, even selling that property. I know you were selling that property and you told everybody, like, hey, listen, here's the great part about it, because the numbers look phenomenal, right? The numbers on the income side, everything else, it was phenomenal income numbers. But you're like, you have to own this for 3x for 3 or 4 years, whatever the number was, 2 years, whatever it was. You figured it out. It's like, you got to own it for this long to make sure that you're covered should this be a total loss. It's going to be,
And a Vodison member currently owns that house.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you break it down, and then somebody can make that on their decision on their own. Right. And so,
and knock on wood, it's still standing. It's still going well. The numbers still look great. Like, let's keep those storms away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We'll knock on wood as well.
But but the interesting part is the current owner who owns it went in eyes wide open, but also now had the resources that, God forbid, year two.
Right.
Nobody wants that, but they were able to absorb that.
Yes.
At the time we owned that home, we were not able to absorb that. So that was a very poor decision at that time from a risk reward standpoint, because we weren't in the position to absorb that. We literally, we would financially have been devastated indefinitely as a family. Yeah. And that's something that I think people really need to think through, because there's certainly other places that are less risky to invest.
For sure. And I love bringing that point up as well, right? If you're going to take the risk, you have to be able to live with the worst case scenario, right?
Yes.
And you're exactly right. The member who purchased this property is perfectly fine being able to absorb the worst case scenario. Not that anybody wants that, not that anybody, but they're not going to be financially devastated should that happen, right? And
the good news is that they've now crossed over. We're about to enter year 4.
Yeah.
So we're okay.
Yeah. So now we're playing with house money now, right?
Yes.
Hopefully we don't even have to worry about that.
Exactly. Hopefully it's never an issue. I put sandbags. I mean, that house should be good for a long time.
Yeah.
We built it well.
Yeah, and so navigate now. So that's on the beaches in North Carolina in Topsail Island, and you briefly mentioned and said, we've gone your current portfolio was completely built in 2023. So walk me through the evolution of the portfolio, the divesting of the portfolio along the way, and how that worked and why we did that. So
fast forward. So a storm came in 2018. The duplex did much better. I mean, we were not talking about tearing down the duplex, but it had a lot of damage and it was a big insurance claim. So I had to file 3 flood claims, 3 wind claims, and then deal with the contract. It was a hot mess. So my big advice, if you ever are in a insurance position like that, there's 2 things. One, a lot of people will say hire a public adjuster. And here's my point of view on that. If you are someone who is incredibly good at project management, and you're likely the kind of person that is self-managing your property and into everything and knows every detail and every receipt, don't bother with the public adjuster, because unless emotionally you're incapable of it, because that's a whole nother thing no one talks about from insurance claims. It is emotionally devastating. I hired a public adjuster. The public adjuster actually was hurting me in the end. And I built such a rapport with my insurance, they're the claims adjusters, that they allowed me to back out the public adjuster, which is almost unheard of. Once you go down that road, you can't back out of that road. But for me, the reason is that I was able to work faster. I had more details, whereas the public adjuster had a lot of claims. Yeah. I think the people who should hire public adjusters are the ones that are just aren't as good as project management, maybe already have a full-time, because it literally became my full-time job to navigate the rebuild and the insurance. I'm not exaggerating. It was a 50 to 60 hour job for almost a solid year to rebuild 3 houses. But, generally speaking, everybody will always say, always hire a public adjuster. And my disclaimer is, if you're someone that is really organized and wants to move quick, and I'm happy to talk to anybody if you want to have the conversation, but that would be the reason not to, because you will move quicker than the public adjuster. For those that just wouldn't even know how to navigate, don't know how to project manage, don't know how to hire their own subcontractors, then yes, 100% don't do it yourself. Let the public adjuster do all of it. Yeah. The other thing is, and to be honest, I don't 100% know if this works the same with a public adjuster or not, but I had found, based on my conversations with, I guess the silver lining of a devastating storm is you actually get to know a lot of people in the area, other owners who otherwise never around at the same time. All of a sudden we're banding together because we're trying to share resources. We're trying to help each other out, or we're just there where normally we'd have renters there. Now all the owners are there. But based on having a lot of conversations with a lot of different owners, most people mitigated their homes, meaning tarp the roof or, put in blowers or dryers, and then waited for the insurance check. Because I actually needed to get the duplex up and running as quickly as possible because I had 3 mortgages I was paying, which I couldn't afford. So we were actually able to get the duplexes open in less than 8 weeks after the storm. Because I had to. Yeah. So we made that decision that we would put all of our resources into the duplex to get that up and running. We were waiting for the counter lever thing with the other house anyway, so that was going to be a thing. And then once I got renters back in the duplex, then I'd start working on the other house again. But what I found that I maxed out every credit card I had ever opened in the last 10 years, and got loans from anybody who was willing to give me money to basically pay for the contractors up front. And when I was doing my insurance claims, I ended up getting all of the money I paid to the contractors back because I'd already paid them. Whereas the other owners who waited for the insurance checks first, what they were finding is that despite the fact that they felt their insurance checks were fair or reasonable or whatever they negotiated, labor, especially on areas that are devastated, tends to go up and up and up because it's supply and demand. Yeah. So what a lot of these owners were finding is by the time they got their check and by the time they got in the queue for the labors, their checks weren't covering what they needed to cover. So that's my other big piece of advice. And like I said, it was credit cards. We didn't have access to savings or anything like that. So my third piece of advice is if you're going to get into this game, have a slush fund available. Right. Because you may need it, or at least access to cash of some kind. Yep. We were paying high interest rates, but I ended up getting, it was a lot of effort and work, but I actually got all of my costs actually covered from my insurance because they were just reimbursing me for actual money paid as opposed to them guessing up front. And then once your claim is closed, generally speaking, your claim is closed. Yep. So that's my other big piece of advice for insurance. Yeah, love it. And you're exactly right. Those costs that would be normally X for a certain service is going to be, sometimes a lot more than X because like you said, supply and demand, especially in those areas they get hit really hard because the contractors are like, hey, we're busy. We can't do it all. We keep raising our prices and they, that happens almost every time in a major disaster like that. Yep. So plan ahead. In the end, it's no different than insurance, right? We're not buying insurance because we know we're going to use it. We're buying insurance with the hope that we never have to use it, but have some sort of reserve of cash access, whether it's a HELOC or high credit cards with high levels or something, if it's not pure savings, because that could make the difference between you being solvent and not being solvent. Absolutely. No question. If you're going to play in the game, any sort of investing game, but this game particularly, especially we're in some of these areas that are susceptible to these storms. And, because that's where, the beaches are where people go visit. And there's a lot of people who do that. And, but regardless of where it's at, even if you're not on the beach in a hurricane zone, you need to have access to capital. Should you have to come up and like you said, fix a property or a major issue that happens or whatever else, you got to have access to capital to be able to handle those things. Otherwise, you can just be out of the game before you know it. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about the portfolio growth and the evolution of the portfolio. Okay. So hurricane was 2018. We sold the duplex in 2019 because, honest to God, I wasn't doing well. Like as we were about to embark on the next storm season, I I was not doing well.
Yeah.
So we just decided as a family that this was supposed to bring joy, and this was supposed to, anyway, we couldn't do it. And so we decided to keep the little house, and we sold the duplex. And so we sold the duplex. I mean, we did okay on it, but we didn't own it long enough to do anything.
Right.
And so that was really more of a, honestly, a mental health game. I mean, like, just 3 was too much. We were okay dealing with a storm, and for those of you not familiar in North Carolina, for the next year or two, we kept getting these mini storms, but the island was so fragile that it's like, it seemed like I rebuilt the beach access probably 4 times in 2 years.
Right.
And so even though in the grand scheme of things, the expense is not huge, I mean, it was quick, right? Like it gets washed away, you hire the contractor, it comes back. But mentally, it was just like, this water keeps taking my house, right?
Right.
And so now we're back to 2019 actually is when I got into property management. I had a client that approached me and said, hey, can you do what you're doing? So in the background, I was starting to, I never intended to be a property manager for other people. It was a very organic kind of growth standpoint. So then 2020, so soon after we met, COVID hits in March, right?
Yeah. So
here's this island who in early 2020, I would say half the island still had their roofs tarped for exactly the reason I said that, those folks were waiting on their insurance checks, and it ended up being a 2.5-year backlog just on roofing companies. So all of a sudden, April of 2020, the mayor shuts down the bridge to the island. There's literally one access point to that island. And the mayor's like, we're done. We're not allowing anyone on or off unless you live here permanently. No one's welcome.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Like, really?
It was like, okay, so I'm barely mentally and emotionally recovered from the storm. We are just barely fiscally recovered, that we're like, okay, 2020 is going to be our year. We're going to finally put some money back in the bank. And now and there was no, like, at that point, it wasn't even like 2 weeks. It was like, we don't know when we're going to open.
Right.
And, peak season is May through September. I can say this a few years later. Hopefully, no, I never go to jail after the fact, but I totally started running a bootleg rental.
Right.
I won't get into the details, but let's just say,
hopefully the feds don't show up now. After
I know, but it was awful. And so basically, blessedly, the closing of the bridge, I don't even remember now. It was probably 6 or 7 weeks. They did reopen right before Memorial Day. I think there probably would have been a riot on that island had they not opened by Memorial Day. But then basically by that August, I looked at my husband. I said, this is no longer my happy place. Yeah. I can't do this anymore. So we sold it. We actually didn't sell it to a Dynasty member. We sold it to someone else, and God rest his soul, he passed less than 2 years after he bought it, which is how it ended up being sold again. But I've retained management of it the whole time. So we basically found ourselves like by this point, I don't know, I was managing maybe 3 or 4 homes for other people, and I didn't have any.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, I kind of feel like I should buy a house now. So I had actually met a different Dynasty member, and he introduced me to the great town of Pinehurst, North Carolina. Now, the running joke about this is the only golf club I've ever held in my life is a putt-putt club, and I'm not very good at that either. So Pinehurst is obviously the home of American golf. And I started running the numbers. And dollar for dollar at that time. So now we're in 2021 at this point. Right. And in 2021, which is now, as we know, almost the height of the STR bubble. We didn't know it at the time, but you could feel that we were kind of cresting. Dollar for dollar with the purchase price, I could get with the right properties. Of course, the caveat always is the right property and the right location with the right amenities and the right setup. dollar for dollar, I could almost get the same percentage gross rental income in Pinehurst that I can at the beach, but with no hurricanes.
Right.
So I was like,
you're so excited.
This is brilliant. Yes. Yeah. Pinehurst. I'm going to fall in love with Pinehurst, and it's going to be my, it was only 90 minutes from my house. I helped that Vodacy member buy his home. I helped another Vodacy member buy a home that, I'm still managing to this day. And we are going to put all of our proverbial and literal eggs into the Pinehurst basket. And I bought a mansion.
Yeah.
Like a legit 8-bedroom, 6-bathroom, indoor pool, the whole 9 yards. We're like, okay, this is it. I only need one, right? We don't, we don't need 10. We just need this one. So I feel like this whole journey is all about jokes on Beata. Because 2021, so this mansion that was built in the late 1800s, it's actually in the historical record. It's a really cool home. It was stuck in the 80s,
right?
Not in a good way. Like it was not in a good way. But I'm not unfamiliar with big flips. This was just the biggest one I've had in, at one time in one home. And so my dad and I embarked with, some extra subcontractors. It took us about 10 months to redo 6 bathrooms, 2 kitchens, 3 living rooms, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it was probably the biggest single project I've ever done. So we're about to launch, I think it was like February or March of 2022. I'm ready because by this point I have now been managing the 2 homes for the other folks for a year. It's been going swimmingly well. The numbers were all penciling out the way we were thought. I'm like, this is it. I finally arrived. It's going to be amazing. And then the town decided to ban short-term rentals.
Right.
I'm not even joking. It's been a debacle. Fast forward, we got grandfathered in, and everybody who'd been renting at the time did eventually get grandfathered in. But it was about 12 months of the neighbors pitting against other neighbors. It was just a horrible, volatile situation. And I'm someone who, as weird as this sounds, like I sense, one, I do a lot of research and I always keep my finger on the kind of the pulse in the industry, but I was sensing in 2022 that the market was, we were coming over the hump. Now I had no idea how fast, how steep. So all of a sudden now I'm sitting in a home that the mortgage, the pity payment alone was almost $10,000.
Right.
By the time you add utilities on an 8,000 square foot home, I mean, that was another $1,500 to $2,000 a month. I mean, I think our base costs, no matter what, were about $13,000 a month on that house. Yeah. And if it was renting the way it was supposed to be, it would still be immensely profitable. But now all of a sudden, I can sense the economy was starting to turn. A very large capacity home like that now requires usually either groups, several sections of multi-generational families that require lead time and planning for travel. The town has gone bat stupid. And one of my neighbors was basically calling the police on every single set of guests the first night they arrived, no matter what they were doing at that point. It was just the police just showed up.
Yeah, it
just happened. So they would watch my calendar and they knew exactly what it was the first night. And we finally found out from the police chief after a conversation that they said that if they send the police, it'll set the right tone for the rest of the trip. So they would behave. Anyway, basically by that summer, I'm like, we're selling.
Right.
I probably could have dealt with and navigated maybe one of those 3 major issues, but I'm like, I'm not doing this again. We already did this once and we made some choices that we blessedly walked away with unscathed. But in hindsight, we realized that they were not the right choices for our family at the time and the financial position we were in. We truly went in eyes wide open this time. But once again, we realized, I'm like, well, shoot, if the rentals don't work out the way they are, we cannot physically float this house.
Right.
We can't. So we're like, okay. So now we're selling so we sold that, we put it on the market in the summer of 2022. But as you can imagine, a house like that does not sell overnight.
Right.
Blessedly, we did sell it at a bit of a profit. But we didn't own it long enough to really gain any real traction. So we did what is commonly referred to now as the poor man's 1031 exchange, because now we're into 2023 and it's not so easy finding a profitable STR anymore. And I was in no way going to sign myself up, because we knew that we wanted to take this one mega property and ideally have about 3 much smaller properties to replace it. There was no way I was going to sign up for that horse manure where you have 60 days and you have to identify all 3 properties and the mortgages have to, I'm like, nope, just not doing it. So we took the calculated risk that we might have to take a big capital gains hit. We calculated that into our numbers. And blessedly, we found our first property pretty quickly. So we closed on our first, it's a riverfront property. It's a true log cabin. It's the biggest one we own, and it's probably going to be the biggest one we ever own, but it's about 4 bedrooms. It's a 3-bedroom, 3-bath in the main log cabin. And then it has an accessory dwelling, tiny home that it's a bathroom, a little kitchenette, and a bedroom. So we call that the 4th bedroom. But it's a beautiful property. It's serene. The running joke was there's no hurricanes there except for this year.
Except for last summer. Yeah.
Except for.
Yeah.
But that's we were okay. We had a bunch of trees down, but in the grand scheme of things, we were literally actually on the periphery.
Right.
And then we bought a property in Raleigh, in November of 2024. November of 2023. I rented it most of 2024. I've never done an urban property before, so that was new territory. And to be honest, it was very scary because I knew how to do vacation. I didn't know how to navigate this whole Raleigh thing. But I actually turned it into a vacation property, and it is in the 1 or 2 top producing 4 bedrooms in Raleigh, and there's over 3,000 STRs in Raleigh proper. So
that's awesome.
I feel very proud of that.
Yes.
And then in April of 2024, we bought actually our smallest property ever that I'm really excited about. It's just a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, walking distance to Main Street of a really cool little small town. And then I was just telling you right before we got on this call that my project for this year is I'm building my first purpose-built STR, but unlike most people who are building these ginormous super properties, my purpose-built STR is going to be a 750 square foot bougie couples retreat where the bathroom is the biggest room in the entire house.
That's awesome.
I'm kind of going full circle, and I like the little properties. I think I'm going to stay in that 1 to 3 bedroom stage I'll never say never. As you can see my journey, it's like life throws me lemons. I have to make lemonade, and then they throw me another lemon, and then I've got to pivot. Like my life is about pivoting. But from where I'm sitting now, I don't know that I'll ever buy a large property at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's how my whole portfolio is 3 bedrooms and under. I like the smaller properties personally myself. That's how we travel. It's what we enjoy doing. It's the experience we enjoy creating, but it works for us, right? And I think that's what you're like listening to that story. You're navigating what's going to kind of what your lane is going to be, right? And where that's going to fit. And
don't be afraid to change lanes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's okay to say, hey, listen, my lane's changed. Right. And your original
for personal
portfolio,
or fiscal reasons.
Yeah. For both. Right. Many times it's both. And your lane completely changed, from, your happy place was the beach to where it became not the happy place, right? Emotionally.
No,
and it was just like, okay, this is just like my blood pressure goes up now when I go to this area. And then we're looking at more of it's just strictly an investment, the numbers work, everything else. And we're like, that really didn't work for me in that lane either. And so now I'm going to go back to my happy place and, in the mountains and more serene and smaller properties and creating these great experiences that you understand. It's going to be, I'm excited. And we didn't really talk about it. You barely touched on it with your Raleigh property, but every one of these properties that you've had has operated in the top of the market, right? So you understand how to create and deliver that experience very, very
And they're all different. Every single, whether I own the property or I manage the property, because I keep my portfolio very small. If you look at the whole portfolio, the common denominators are we are aiming for the very top of that market. And that when I call it a market, it's location and size.
Yep, exactly.
Right? Because my 2-bedroom can't compete with an 8-bedroom. That's a completely different market, even if it's in the same town. But that's kind of how we aim. But every one of them has a slightly different flavor. Every one of them has a slightly different vibe. Every one of them has a slightly different kind of experience. But what's ubiquitous is that for that market, we are offering one of the best experiences you can get in an STR. Yeah. And that's what's worked well for us.
Yeah, and it's
and that translates.
Yeah, exactly. That's the game we play. Is we're in the experience business. When they might be different experiences, they might be different stories that you're telling, they might be different vibes or themes, but they all have one, right? And you lean into it, and they all are a very elevated experience to the point where you're able to operate these properties despite all of these little navigating all these roadblocks and all these challenges that have been there. You've been able to operate at the top of these markets when it comes to delivering an experience and operating at the top revenue, to your point, with property size and location, which is what the game's about.
Year over year.
Yeah. And now it's just saying, hey, we're just going to make sure those elements are in every single one of our properties in our portfolio. As you start to, with this much time under your belt now and this much experience, my guess is you're really honing in what is going to work for you with that portfolio. So I'm excited to see how this one, as you start to put this one together. I think that now, even knowing you for as long as I've known you and all the conversations we've had over the years, you're that it's okay, I'm excited. I like the direction we're at. I feel good. I feel comfortable. Like you said, you're a lot about feelings and really kind of sensing what's going on. And you're saying that, hey, this is kind of fun, the fun zone again, right?
Yep.
That's good. Hey, Beata, so as we wrap up these conversations, first, thank you. This has been amazing. I love having these conversations. I love catching up. It's like you and I just having a conversation, people listening in. So it's my favorite. These are my favorite podcast episodes by far. And so at the end of them, though, I always like to ask you, navigating all that, is there one specific thing that comes to mind that you would love to tell your younger self that, as you've lessons learned of, or somebody listening that's saying, hey, I'm just getting into this. What's a piece of advice you'd want to share with somebody that's, a few steps behind?
And we didn't touch on this part at all, but probably the lesson I've learned that if I could go back in time, because all of these house things that we talked about, there's nothing I could have done differently. I don't actually have regrets about that part because life threw lemons that I couldn't possibly predict. Right. So maybe be a little bit more conservative but in the end, all of those things, just be able to be pivot, right? Be flexible, know that life is going to throw curveballs. But the biggest lesson we didn't touch on at all this time, and we could talk about another time if you're very interested, is in this business, we work with a lot of vendors, whether they're cleaners, handymen, bookkeepers, admins to some degree. We work with a lot of vendors. If I could go back in time, I would tell my younger self and anybody else just getting started, don't be afraid to switch vendors when you feel it's not working. Right. I consistently held on for too long, and I consistently found myself changing the role and expectation to fit that person, as opposed to saying, this is what I need and want in my business, and either you're the right person or not. And I finally started doing that only last year, truly. Yeah. And it has completely changed both my mental health, my enjoyment of this industry, how I view life, and my profitability in business. That one single thing is figure out what you need and want in your business out of each of these roles in each of these places, and keep evaluating. And if the person no longer fits, move on.
Right.
Because if you hold on too long, it can cripple you financially, it could cripple you emotionally, or it can make this already really difficult industry a lot more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And I don't think anybody's given that advice yet on these episodes. And it's that old adage of hire slow, fire fast, right? And
I was not good at that in the beginning.
Right. And that because a lot of business owners are told that, right? But we are really operating a business. You're working with you've got a customer base, you're delivering a unique experience to that customer base. But you also are working with a lot of vendors and a lot of partners along this journey. And even though they might not be direct employees in your company, they're people that are essentially your employees, right? That you're working with together, and that, hire slow, fire fast should be in there for sure. Couldn't agree more, because if it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. It's not going to get better, right? Either expectations were wrong on the front end from one or both sides, or somebody's not living up to those expectations. And either way, typically it needs to be changed. And so, love that, to be able to say, hey, listen, it's okay to pivot. And sometimes you have to have those hard conversations, and it makes your life easier. It's usually easier for that person that's not performing either, because they're probably not happy in that same type of a situation or relationship. So love that piece of advice. So Beata, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. This is a really fun conversation. Those of you who are listening in, we know how valuable your time is, and I always appreciate you spending it with us. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to, for us growing this show. We don't run ads on this show. I don't run sponsorships. So the only way this thing grows is if you guys share it. So if you know anybody else that want to be part of these conversations and walk into this short-term rental game with their eyes wide open, be part and listen to short-term rental investors, the ups, downs, the in-betweens of their journey, it can be really, really helpful for people. Share that. We do appreciate that. If you have more than 30 seconds, like it or review it on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. And the final most important thing that I ask you at the end of every episode, pick that one thing you can do today, start building that life you don't want to take vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website?
Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodacy.com.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.